Hello, welcome to the inaugural edition of the Daily Fantasy Cafe on Air podcast. I'm Justin. You may know me as Big Italy 42 from Twitter. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here talking a little NBA, some takeaways from last night's big 12-game slate. Starting off with Boston and the New York Knicks. Some interesting things to note here. Jay Crowder, 29 minutes in this game, 18.6 rebounds, 4 assists and a steal, had just over 33 FanDuel points. He's a guy you're going to want to watch at small forward right now. He's producing at a high level, just over 4K most nights. Another interesting player still coming off the bench, got Isaiah Thomas, a.k.a. IT2. Played 27 minutes, had 19.6 rebounds, 7 assists, so he's definitely someone to watch moving forward, nice and cheap as well. On the New York Knicks side of things, we know things are pretty ugly with them. One lone bright spot they had last night, Andrea Bargnani, 25 minutes, shot just 5 of 13, but 17 points, 6 rebounds and assists, and 2 blocks. Just under 30 fantasy points last night at just under 4K. So maybe keep an eye on him as a deep sleeper in some tournaments moving forward. Next up, we've got Chicago and Charlotte. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist was the minutes monster last night. 42 minutes, 18 points, 12 rebounds, just under 36 FanDuel points. Mo Williams saw a little decrease in minutes there, 26 minutes, but still managed just under 28 fantasy points. As expected, Pau Gasol, one of the highest scorers on the night with Derrick Rose out, played 35 minutes, 25 points, 13 boards, 4 blocks, 48.1 FanDuel points. Aaron Brooks is the guy who is a direct benefactor of the Derrick Rose injury. He's nice and cheap, but at the same time, you're not going to go overboard because seen it before, he is a volume shooter, but most of the offense is still going to come through Pau Gasol and Jimmy Butler. But he did manage 24 fantasy points in 28 minutes last night. Moving on to the game that everyone was targeting, the Los Angeles Clippers and Houston Rockets. We had DeAndre Jordan with another monster performance, 22 points, 19 rebounds, just over 47 FanDuel points. Chris Paul, another nice game, 22 points, 14 assists, over 44 fantasy points. So if you're looking at the Clippers from now moving forward with Blake Griffin on the shelf, you're still looking at DeAndre Jordan and you're still looking at Chris Paul and a little bit of Jamal Crawford mixed in there, maybe some JJ Redick where he's cheap, but you know where the primary parts of this offense is right now. Another bright spot here for Houston. We saw James Harden. He twisted his ankle, ended up finishing out the game. Disappointing by his standards. 21 points, 10 assists, 4 rebounds. But another bright spot here, Terrence Jones, 14 points, 8 rebounds, an assist, and 5 blocks. And he's been playing really well over his last 4 games. He's averaging 12.3 points, 10.3 rebounds, and 3.5 blocks per contest. So as long as his price stays low, it's just under 6K last night, he's definitely a guy you're going to be targeting your cash games, and he even makes for a pretty good GPP play as well. Moving on to Milwaukee and Philadelphia. Michael Carter-Williams returning into his old team, only played a few minutes, looked decent, not too much to note in this one. It was an ugly game from beginning to end. Next up we have Washington, Minnesota, and surprisingly, Minnesota with a big win last night. Convincing win. Nikola Pekovic, 35 minutes, had 15 points, 13 boards, an assist, and a steal. Kevin Martin with another one of his almost primarily scoring lines, 28 points, 2 rebounds, and assists, 2 steals, just under 33 FanDuel points there. Ricky Rubio, despite shooting just 2 for 9 in 30 minutes, 6 points, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, and 4 steals, just over 32 fantasy points. So Rubio's one of those guys you can definitely be targeting in your GPPs, and he gets it done even when he's not scoring. So definitely keep an eye on him moving forward. And on the Washington side, it was just ugly. It was a bad game for everyone. They scored under 80 points. So no major takeaways on that end. Brooklyn, New Orleans last night, we saw Jarrett Jack is now back, and he saw 28 minutes while Darren Williams saw 34. Jack had the more productive night, but I think that's a situation that I'm looking to avoid for the time being until we get some clarity on who's going to get minutes, etc. moving forward. Joe Johnson, 39 minutes for Brooklyn, had 21 points and 10 rebounds. So nice game for him. Not much value anywhere else in that game. So I'm going to go ahead and move on here to Phoenix and Denver, one of the better games we had last night. Nice competitive game. We saw PJ Tucker, who's really been coming on recently last night. 12 points, 9 boards, 2 assists, 2 steals, 34.1 fantasy points. And more on him later, but he's under $5,000 right now on FanDuel. And he's a guy you can play tonight, and he's a guy I've been slotting in there at that weak small forward position and just kind of moving on because he's just been getting it done. Next up, we've got Eric Bledsoe, who has really benefited from being the primary ball handler now with Brandon Knight in town, playing at shooting guard. Saw Bledsoe last night, 18.6 rebounds, 6 boards, just over 34 FanDuel points. So not quite to his value threshold, but still a solid game on his end. On the Denver side of things, we saw Danilo Gallinari have himself another nice game, 27.9 FanDuel points. So until his price goes up, if we still see Wilson Chandler struggling, especially not being able to play, struggling with that injury, then he's a guy that you're definitely going to be looking at at small forward as well, and his price is still pretty fair, under $5K. Lone bright spot for the Lakers last night, we had Jordan Clarkson, 34 minutes, put up 22 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals. So he's really the only target I am looking at with the Lakers at this moment. Carlos Boozer provides you a little bit of a value, but his price tag isn't exactly where I'd like it. So a pass on him most places, but Jordan Clarkson's price pretty fair, and he's been producing at a pretty high level. And Rudy Gobert had himself another great game and a good matchup. 16 points, 14 rebounds, an assist, a steal, and 3 blocks, which for Rudy Gobert is a little bit of a disappointment, but he still had himself a monster game, one of the higher scorers on the night, 42.8 fantasy points on FanDuel. Memphis, Sacramento, saw a little testiness there between DeMarcus Cousins and Zach Randolph in the third quarter, and with Cousins in foul trouble for most of the game and Darren Collison still out, Rudy Gay had himself a nice night, 28 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds. It's over 43, right at 43 fantasy points on FanDuel. So he's a guy with his price under 8K right now. You really want to be looking his way, even if DeMarcus Cousins is in these games and not worried about foul trouble, because he's just been producing at a high level. George Karl's got him playing at the 3 and the 4, and he's a great target at a weak position most nights. San Antonio and Portland, real weird game here. Portland got up 16 points in the first quarter. Spurs made it a game in the second quarter. Finally, Portland pulled away. Wesley Matthews had himself a career game, 31 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals. So he was the surprising high scorer of the night, 47.5 fantasy points. Next up, we're going to take a look at tonight's slate. It's only a 2-game slate, and you're going to want to tread lightly with 2-game slates. I don't like to play cash games on 2-game slates. There's too much unpredictability. There's not many options. So on my end, it's a tournament-only night. I like to take a couple shots in some big tournaments, maybe multiple entries in a smaller tournament. But for a 2-game slate, it's actually pretty interesting. We've got ourselves 2 games with really high totals. First off, Golden State and Cleveland, 214.5 point total. Golden State is -3 in this one, so expected to obviously be a close game. You've got your main targets obviously here. You're looking at LeBron James, he's at 10,400. You've got Stephen Curry at 10,300. Either of those guys absolutely in play for this one. You're also going to be taking a look at guys like Kevin Love, who's coming in. He's got 8.3 tonight, and his last 2, 36.7 and 41.3 fantasy points. So definitely look his way, because we've got a really, really weak power forward group tonight. So Kevin Love, a guy that's on my radar. Another guy to look at that's been playing very well recently, Andre Iguodala, 4,500 tonight. You've seen him over 21 or more fantasy points in 3 straight games. Granted, one of those was with Stephen Curry sitting out against Indiana, but he's eating up minutes. He's got 27, 32, and 30 over his last 3. So a guy to look at there if you're playing tonight. You need a little bit of value there at small forward. And also LeBron James, we've seen it. He's been very efficient recently, right in between 35 and 46 fantasy points each of his last 10 games. So a lot of consistency with him. Don't know that he's really flashed much upside for me to be paying 10.4 for him tonight, but obviously a 2-game slate, everyone's in play. I feel like LeBron may end up being the lower owned of the studs tonight, so maybe give him a look in a couple of your GPPs. Outside of that, if you're looking at Kyrie Irving, I don't really like him a whole lot at 8,400 tonight. Obviously, a spot where he could have himself a nice game, but the value has been so spread out between the three main guys in Cleveland, I don't know that I'm willing to pay 8.4 tonight for Kyrie Irving. I'd much rather just pay up for Stephen Curry and Russell Westbrook. Moving on to our next game here, we've got Oklahoma City, 5-point favorite at Phoenix, 216.5 point total. Already mentioned PJ Tucker earlier. Been playing really well. He's a guy that I'm going to be targeting once again tonight. He's at 4.9K, which is an absolute steal for his recent production. And I don't need to tell you to play Russell Westbrook. He already has a huge usage rate with Kevin Durant on the court. Now Kevin Durant out, he's going to have himself another huge usage rate. He's going to be matched up against Eric Bledsoe for much of the night, and he's obviously matchup proof at this point. You look at his last couple logs, 45, 54, 52, 53, 53. Remarkably consistent. He's certainly going to be the most popular play on the entire board tonight, and I don't blame you for playing him. I can't see any scenario where you fade Russell Westbrook on this two-game slate. So if you want to get real crazy, maybe a one-tournament lineup, if you've got a bunch, maybe put in a Kyrie and Curry duo there, point guard on FanDuel, but that's not a route that I'm going to be traveling tonight because that's just too much risk with his 60, 65 point upside, especially in a 216.5 point total. The guy that I'm really going to be playing along with Russell Westbrook, as I have been with Kevin Durant out, is Serge Ibaka, 7,200. Already mentioned how weak power forward is tonight. You look at his recent logs, and he's playing well. He's got 36.9, 46.6, and 38 fantasy points in 3 games since Kevin Durant's injury. And the interesting thing here is he only played 29 minutes and 26 minutes in his last 2 because the Thunder got out to big leads. So Serge Ibaka, if he ends up playing the full complement of minutes, mid-30s, I would assume maybe upper 30s, it's a solid matchup for him against Markieff Morris and company down low. So I expect him to have himself yet another big game tonight. So he will be someone that will be in every one of my lineups tonight. Looking over on the Phoenix side, you're obviously going to be considering Eric Bledsoe in this one. Been, like I mentioned earlier, playing really well with Brandon Knight beside him there. He's at 8,400 tonight, which I think is a fair price. And on a 2-game slate, I'm really not concerned too much about return on value here. You're really just looking to play the best plays at the best positions tonight, and shooting guard's a pretty weak position. So you've got your Eric Bledsoe, you've got Klay Thompson if you wanted to go that route, he's 7,100. And J.R. Smith is a guy who was showing some consistency, kind of fell off last game. 22 minutes against Detroit, just 15 fantasy points. But with limited options tonight, I'm not going to go too crazy. I'm going to try to roster as many studs as I can and find some values. Small forward, I already mentioned a few. Power forward is going to be tough, but you could always look at a guy like Mitch McGary, has been playing pretty well, over 20 fantasy points each of his last 3. You do worry about his minutes, 15, 21, and 19 in those games. So obviously a little bit of a risk, but many players down that price on a 2-game slate are going to be risks for you. So tread lightly there, but definitely he's a guy that I'll be targeting there at 4,000. If you're looking at the center position here, not a lot of upside here. I mean, you've got Timothy Mozgov going up against Andrew Bogut. He's 5,800. He's a guy who could return value. I mean, you don't expect Cleveland to have to go as big tonight. We've seen Harrison Barnes was playing some time at the 4. David Lee's played some time at the 5. So maybe he sees a few less minutes tonight if Golden State decides to go small. So I'm going to pass on him. Enes Kanter is a guy who's definitely in play at 5,800. You've got Alex Len, who's a good defender. He's been blocking some shots, but his minutes have been finally trending upward. So Len is going to be my target. Only 21 minutes last night, but different type of a game after the Suns went small. So the 3 games prior to that, since the All-Star break, 32, 34, and 35 minutes. So Alex Len at 5K is going to be the guy that I'm going to be targeting the most. If you're looking to go cheap, I wouldn't recommend really doing that, but you do have Brandon Wright, who has at least 16 fantasy points in his last 4 games. No more than 22 minutes played in any of those, though, so tread lightly there as well. But at 3.6K, if you're looking to fit maybe Curry, Westbrook, and Ibaka into a lineup, you're going to need to get cheap somewhere, so I don't think that that's a bad scenario for you there necessarily. Go ahead and talk about a couple things here about market exploitation. We've got some articles up about that if you'd like to get some more information. But market exploitation basically is how you attack playing on multiple sites. So, for instance, tonight, if you're playing on FanDuel versus DraftKings, I went ahead and looked at some numbers, and you can find some great values by finding a difference in salary between two players. So, highlighted a couple here. Russell Westbrook's only a $300 difference, a little bit cheaper on FanDuel, so nothing significant there. If you're looking at Stephen Curry, he's $500 less on DraftKings. The biggest difference is DJ Augustine. Now, obviously, not much upside there now in his new role, but $7,000 on FanDuel, obviously not even in consideration in any scenario for me tonight. But on DraftKings, you've got him at 4.1K, so he could be an interesting guy to throw in a couple tournaments. He's been playing a decent amount of minutes, 23, 30, and 25 over his last three. So, I repeat, do not play him on FanDuel at 7K, but on DraftKings, I think he's a fine play. You're also looking at a big difference in Tristan Thompson, $5,000 on FanDuel, $3,600 on DraftKings. Not for me. I'm not interested in playing him tonight. Kevin Love is $500 cheaper at $7,800 as opposed to $83 if you're playing on DraftKings. And PJ Tucker, who I've mentioned now a couple times, $4,900 on FanDuel, $5,400 on DK. Moving on now, I want to talk about some players to watch moving forward, players who are in some new roles and new offenses and new situations due to injuries. So I'm going to start things off here with Isaiah Thomas, who I already talked about. He's still coming off the bench. Seems like he will be for the foreseeable future, but Boston has struggled to find a primary ball handler. He is now that guy, and it's just 27 minutes last night, but he's producing at a high level. He's a volume scorer. He's a solid passer, and that's something that Boston really needs. So once he gets more adapted to that new offense, his price is great around the industry, right around 6K. So he's a guy that I'll be targeting quite a bit. Another guy we saw had a nice night last night, Jonas Jerebko. I'm not going to go too crazy with him right away, but he's a guy to monitor, maybe throw in a tournament lineup or two. Scored 20 actual points last night in a reduced amount of minutes. I believe it was 21 minutes. So definitely keep an eye on him. Aaron Brooks, mentioned him in passing. He's going to be seeing more minutes with Derrick Rose out. His price is very cheap. He's near minimum salary everywhere. So at least until his price gets up a little bit, he's a guy I'll be targeting as a nice punt play. You don't expect huge upside, 40 points, anything like that, but 20 to 25, and you're happy around his price point right now. Mo Williams stepping into the Kemba Walker role in Charlotte, and he's excelled. He had himself probably his worst game last night since he's been on board, but still almost 28 fantasy points. So his price also mid 5,000s right now. He's a guy that you can definitely target. Take advantage of that before his price adjusts for his new role with the Hornets. Reggie Jackson, an obvious play. Everyone who's been playing over the past week or so knows this. His new role in Detroit, definitely a great spot for him. His price is down. We'll have to see what it is for Detroit's next game, but he's definitely got to target until his price gets too high. I mentioned Andrea Bargnani earlier. Not a guy I would ever be playing in my cash games, but the Knicks are a mess. They don't really have consistent scores. He showed it last night. He scored, I believe, almost 30 fantasy points. So he had himself a nice night. They don't have reliable options down low. They don't have guys who can consistently score. So he's a guy definitely to keep on the back burner. Maybe see if he keeps this up for a couple games. The high volume, he took 13 shots last night. So if he keeps that kind of volume shooting, the Knicks rely on him a little bit. Maybe you can work him into some more tournaments, but still definitely not a cash game guy, just a guy to monitor moving forward. Nicholas Batum, guy who, once again, was heavily drafted this year, early draft even, been a big disappointment most of the year with a wrist injury, couldn't get it done shooting. He was struggling with his shot, struggling on defense, and as we've seen with Nicholas Batum, a lot of his value comes from peripheral stats. So had a couple games where he was finally turned around, and over his last two now, averaging 16.7 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 3-pointers per game. So I'd like to see it for a little bit more than a few games at this point before I go all in on him, but he is under 6K. He's playing well, and you don't need a whole lot to pay out that price tag. So definitely monitor that. There are rumblings that Darren Collison may be out for the season now, so McCollum, Andre Miller, keep an eye on these two guys right now. I'm sorry, McCallum, not McCollum. Keep an eye on these two guys moving forward. Kind of a timeshare there. Neither one with significant upside, but maybe go with the cheaper guy and see where you can find yourself some value. And one of my favorite players right now, also mentioned him earlier, Terrence Jones. playing himself a great amount of basketball right now, averaging a triple-double over his last 4. So definitely want to be looking his way moving forward. One last thing I want to talk about here are a couple of statistics that you want to look at when you're building your rosters. Usage rate is a number that a lot of DFS players look at when trying to determine impact from injuries, things like that, and it's very important, especially when you realize injuries. There's great sites. NBA Wowie is one. You can go on there. You can type in a team with players, without players. You can see who gets a big usage bump or who doesn't, depending on what happens with the injuries and the new scenarios and everything. So definitely something to look at. If you haven't looked into it, basically it's the percentage amount that player uses, the number of percentage of possessions that player uses in the offense throughout the game. So Russell Westbrook, we know, highest in the league by far without Kevin Durant. Definitely some guys to take note of. There's some significant increase. So maybe monkey around with that a little bit, take a look at that if that's not something that you're familiar with. It's a key statistic that I and many others use each day. One other one is pace. This is basically the number of possessions per 48 minutes that a team plays. There's a formula to it. If you like to find it, there's one on basketballreference.com. You can go find that. Actually, 3 of the top 8 teams in pace tonight are in action on this 2-game slate. So these are teams that you want to target. They're usually high scoring, usually a lot more rebounds, a lot more transition baskets, more assists. These are the teams you want to target. You've got teams like Charlotte, Miami that are really low, not usually good DFS targets, but Golden State number 1, Phoenix number 2 tonight, OKC number 8, Cleveland just 24th, but a team like Cleveland can play up in pace when necessary, so that's something to monitor for you as well. And I will be back with you here tomorrow. I'll have myself a special guest, and we'll go over tomorrow's slate, recaps from tonight's small slate, and we'll try and see some more takeaways moving forward, some things that we might be able to monitor, maybe some new situations. So thanks for hanging out with us on the original inaugural podcast today for the Daily Fantasy Cafe, and we will see you again tomorrow.